What if your elderly parent or grandparent is encouraged to sign an advance directive that could result in euthanasia? Stay with us. Catholic Parents Online is next. Hello and welcome to Catholic Parents Online, a program where we explore the issues Catholic parents face while raising their children. I'm your host, Colleen Perfect. The word euthanasia means good death, and it refers to the practice of intentionally ending a life to relieve pain and suffering. Here is what the Catechism of the Catholic Church has to say about euthanasia. Those whose lives are diminished or weakened deserve special respect. Sick or handicapped persons should be helped to lead lives as normal as possible. Whatever its motives and means, direct euthanasia consists in putting an end to the lives of handicapped, sick, or dying persons. It is morally unacceptable. Intentional euthanasia, whatever its forms or motives, is murder. It is gravely contrary to the dignity of the human person and to the respect due to the living God, His Creator. I'm pleased to welcome back one of our favorite guests, Mary Therese Hellmuller, who will share her own personal story of the devastating impact euthanasia had on the life of her family. Mary is a nurse specializing in critical care, and she is also a certified legal nurse consultant. She is the founder and CEO of Guadalupe Travel Incorporated, providing pilgrimages to Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City for the past 25 years. Welcome back, Mary.
Oh, Colleen,
thank you
it's a
for
privilege.
coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're on a different topic, but
we sure
by
are.
all means, this is an important topic.
It sure is.
So,
Yes.
Mary, could you start by telling us what euthanasia is?
Well, I love your introduction. I think that was beautifully stated. Euthanasia is an act or an omission with the intent of ending a human life. And generally, it's because of suffering. That they want to end all suffering. And that's where the basic problem is that in our day and society today, there is no value to suffering.
No.
They see it as a nuisance, they see it as it's just a waste, and so let's take care of it, let's get rid of it. And so unfortunately, we're dealing with euthanasia today. So.
It's a sad situation. Well, Mary, can you tell us about your own personal experience with euthanasia? I know you have some very sad stories.
Very interesting. You know, in 1995, which is quite a few years ago, I was still, I was nursing, critical care nurse, and the first story I want to share with you is what happened to my father. And so these are personal stories. I'm not violating HIPAA or anything else, but these are personal stories. And so my father was diagnosed with colon cancer, and he had a major part of his colon removed. The cancer had spread to his liver, and so they had recommended that he be seen by an oncologist and that he be started on the 5-FU, which was a chemotherapy agent. And so he received 1 or 2 doses of the 5-FU, and he had a reaction to it. He became very dehydrated, and he collapsed at home. His veins, they had a very hard time in the emergency room getting an IV in because he was so extremely dehydrated. And so the emergency room doctor called the oncologist that my father had, and the oncologist said, send him home. Don't admit him to the hospital. And the ER physician said, I can't do that. He'll die if I send him home.
Of course.
And so then it was a friend of the family's who's a very good friend who we called, And he said, I'll admit your father to the hospital.
Thank God for him.
Right, but if we would have followed that direction, I would not have my father today.
No.
It's now, I mean, he is looking very well, you know, and this is...
But you're a nurse. You
I'm
knew
a nurse,
better. I
right.
mean, most people would follow doctor's orders.
Would follow doctor's orders, is correct. And so I am fortunate enough that, you know, my mother's a nurse, I'm a nurse, and we were able to say, no, this is not appropriate. He will die. And so he was in the hospital for a couple of days, and we fired the oncologist. And a lot of people don't realize that you can fire your doctor if you need to. And but honestly, if you are feeling that, you know, this is totally inappropriate, I mean, how could I trust him? I mean, I argued with the staff at this hospital. I said, how could I trust him with anything else now when he wouldn't admit my father?
That's right.
And he would have went home to die.
Right.
Literally.
He needed to be fired.
Right. And so as soon as he was hemodynamically stable, I had him transferred then to another place. But so that is what I call euthanasia of omission, not giving appropriate care to people. It's amazing.
But
you know,
dad,
that was in 1995. You've met him?
Yeah, he's totally healthy. And
he looks wonderful.
Oh,
I know. Yeah, this is what, over 15 years later.
And they took it onto themselves to think that he didn't have any quality of life left in him.
Right, right, because, well, he's over 65. But, you know, so anyways, at that time he was over 65. He's now in his 80s, you know.
Wow.
So,
Yes.
but he looks wonderful. He still does his gardening. He's very active. And I'm just so very grateful.
Yes.
But people have to realize that this is happening, you know, and that question, you know, and you don't have to go by, you know, what a doctor says. Get a second opinion, and then you do have a right to fire if you don't, you know, like the care that's being given, and you can transfer your loved one to a different facility as well. They don't realize that those are options.
That's right.
And so that is really what saved my father. So it's an interesting story, but here's me as a medical professional having to do this. I was like, this is absolutely crazy.
It was, yes.
Yeah. So then the next one, which was relatively soon after my father's issue, was my grandmother. She was 90 years old, and I cared for her the last 5 years of her life. She needed to be dressed in the morning. She had bursitis in her arms. You know, like older people, sometimes they get a little hard to move. But she was able to, you know, eat by herself. I'd need to fix, you know, a meal for her, but, you know, she could eat. And then her main job during the day was to pray 6 rosaries a day. And she was praying. She was praying for all of us, you know, and that was her job, is to pray. And so that's what she did all day.
Important job.
And she took great pride in that. But one day when I was in Mexico with a pilgrimage group, she had fallen in the bathtub and just fractured, had a slight fracture above her knee. And she was brought into the emergency room, and she waited all day to have surgery. They did surgery, put a cast on her leg, and then the next morning it was hard for her to wake up. Well, I can tell you that an older person, especially in the 90s, they're very susceptible to drugs. And so they're like little children. You have to be very careful in the amounts that you give them. And I mean, she would be very sleepy if you just gave her 125 milligram of Benadryl. So
okay,
if you know what Benadryl is, you know.
Yes.
So anyways, I knew that it would be hard to wake her up for a little bit after that. But this is now a 90-year-old who had surgery, had general anesthesia, who was given some narcotics for pain, and now they were having a hard time just kind of getting her awake. So they called in a neurologist. And the neurologist came in that morning. I was in Mexico City. My mom was in Mexico City. You know, we're on pilgrimage. And so my father, who was not medically minded, was, you know, there at the hospital. So anyhow, the neurologist asked my grandmother to put her arm over her head. My grandmother could never do that. I had to dress her because of the bursitis, and she had limited motion. Well, because she was sleepy and because she couldn't move that arm, he said, she had a stroke. She had a stroke.
Oh,
She had a
no.
stroke. So anyhow, within about an hour and a half after he had left, she was eating breakfast and she was doing fine. You know, I mean, she was waking up, and but nonetheless, the whole process started. He had ordered Dilantin to be given to her. God only knows why.
And that is?
It's an anti-seizure medication. And I did not know.
Seizures.
I didn't know this at the time either when I was in Mexico. So everything went really fast. She went from eating breakfast that morning to becoming very somnolent to then she's dying to we got to get her to hospice.
Oh my heavens.
And I mean, it was within 3 days she was dead.
Oh, Mary.
But it was just a progression that and it's just my inquisitive nature. I mean, I was crushed when I got the word.
Of course.
And of course, my father was calling and trying to keep us posted on how she was doing. But I thought, boy, she's going down so fast. I don't understand why she's going down that fast.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it was, you know what, they're saying we should transfer her to hospice. You know, so me being long distance, I had asked the nurse, you know, please, you know, open up the chart. I want to hear, you know, what were the lab results? What was she having seizures? You know, all of that. Please read to me. Well, it was very difficult to get that information at first time. So it took another phone call back, and the nurse said, "Oh, yeah, she must be having seizures, and that's why they ordered the Dilantin." Well, I know that would be the common presumption, you know. So anyways, and then the labs were all normal, but they said, oh, she's in kidney failure. And I said, oh, really, kidney failure? Why? I mean, she's not putting out any urine or anything. So it's very hard at a distance. And I was not thinking euthanasia. I wasn't thinking along those terms. And so it caught me off guard. And so anyways, I thought, well, okay, if you think hospice is appropriate and she is dying, and, you know, then, you know, okay, then, you know, hospice is probably the right choice then. But I still was very perplexed by everything. And so anyways, then I get the call back that 5 minutes after she was transferred to hospice, she died.
5 minutes?
5 minutes. And I went,
what?
This is so odd. I mean, I don't understand what happened here. So when I got home and after the funeral and everything, I said to Mom, I said, you know, you've worked in the emergency room all your, you know, many, many years. I've worked in intensive care. None of this makes any sense.
No.
I said, we need to have some closure with what actually happened. And so I called the medical records department of this hospital, and I said, it would really give me comfort to know the last moments of my grandmother's death, because we weren't able to be back in time. And we were out of the country, and they said, fine, you know, so they reserved a room for us, and they brought in the chart. And when I was reading the chart, I just sobbed.
Oh.
I just sobbed. There were no seizures. All the labs were normal. And actually what happened is that she was given a lethal dose of Dilantin, but it was divided in 3 doses on each shift. It was a lethal dose.
You knew it was lethal because of being a nurse, and you know the amount.
All you have to do is look it up in the PDR and the, you know, physician drug book. And, you know, it was a lethal dose given within 24 hours.
Oh,
and
Mary.
So I sat there and I just bawled because, you know, in the notes, this is before computer charting, of course, in #95, but in the notes, clearly my grandmother was waking up in between times saying, I don't want to die. I want to see Greta walk. That was her new grandchild. I want to see Johnny ordained a priest. And then she'd, you know, drift back off. And, you know, it was just so heart-wrenching, you know, for us, you know. And so anyhow, it's just bringing up all the emotions.
Of course it is.
So it was really a shocker to me, you know, that this could happen.
Yeah.
Number one, you know, on her death certificate said that she died of natural causes.
No.
And I looked at this and I went, no, she was given Dilantin and there were no seizure activities. I went through the chart. I know how to read a chart.
That's right.
I'm a nurse. I read charts every day.
Yep.
You know? And clearly EEG said no seizure activity. So why was Dilantin being given? I had lots of questions. I did not understand this. So anyhow, what happened then is I contacted an attorney, and I was telling him, the story. And he says, Mary, that's pretty hard to believe. He said, this is like the movie Coma. He said, this is really hard for me to believe. And I said, well, listen, I've worked critical care all my life. I know how to read charts. I know, that this was inappropriate. Something was not right here. She didn't have a terminal diagnosis. A stroke, even if she had a stroke, that is not a terminal diagnosis for hospice.
Right.
Okay, so I said, that's inappropriate. So anyhow, what happened then is about maybe 6 weeks later, I get a call from my attorney, and he says, Mary, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I have a story to tell you of my own. He said, my mother-in-law, who is in her 80s, had a stroke, and she was sent to the same hospital. And she was very stuporous, kind of in and out, and they said she was in a coma, and that they should send her to hospice. That's the most humane thing to do, is to send her to hospice. And he, remembering my story, started wondering, okay, what kind of medications has she been given? Because they were saying, let's take out the IV, we're not going to put in a tube feeding for her, she's just going to go to hospice. And the neurologist was very upset, because he was started to ask some questions. And so the neurologist said, you come into this room and I'll show you how obtunded she is and how comatose she is. So in the middle of his exam, this woman, it was just the hand of God, this woman opens her eyes, pulls the tie of the neurologist down to her nose, they were nose to nose, and she says, give me some water. Loud and clear. And then he tried to make it look like, this is a fluke, this is just, she doesn't know what she's saying, and do you want to fight? And then she turns to her son-in-law, who's the attorney, and says, who in the heck is this guy? So it was like, yeah. So anyways, they canceled hospice, maintained an IV, got a tube feeding. In 2 weeks, she was at Little Sisters of the Poor on the treadmill.
Oh my heavens.
That's the difference. So this is what I'm saying. This is euthanasia.
It is. It's murder. It's murder.
Because this is intentional.
Yes.
This is saying, oh no, you've lived your life, 80 years old. Boom. This is the path for you. Hospice, no food, no water. You're going to die of dehydration and starvation.
They're playing God. They're playing God.
Yeah. But she went on. So it was a remarkable story just from the attorney knowing my story. It kind of, it was like he was able to save his mother-in-law. Yes. Isn't that remarkable?
And he didn't even believe you at first. He thought it was too outrageous.
Yeah, he thought it was too outrageous. And I said, I know it sounds crazy, but I know what I'm looking at. I know what I'm reading. Yeah. I know. Wow. Yeah, I know nursing, and I know, appropriate dosages of medications and things, And besides, because somebody has a stroke doesn't mean that they're terminal. Right. Not getting food and water will make any one of us terminal.
That's right.
If you gave me drugs and I was sleepy and I didn't feed me, I would die. I'd be terminal. So this is what is happening. So and then another story is a friend of mine, very close friend of mine, had pneumonia, and she was on the ventilator. And sometimes, when people are making out these living wills, they say, I do not want to be on the ventilator, I do not want. And you have to be careful what you put down. Be very, very careful, because you do not know. Each situation is so different. And it is appropriate to put somebody on a ventilator sometimes to support their respiratory, their whole system, just until the antibiotics start taking effect and until they can fight the infection. Well, what happened to her is she ended up on the ventilator. She had to have a trach. And I bumped into her family, and they were, and I just said, how's so-and-so? And they said, the staff at the hospital have just mentioned that, we should just do palliative care for her. I said, no, she's in her 50s. She's a young person. Give her a chance. Put that trach in. Maybe she has to go on to therapy, for a few months. But they took the advice, and they stood up against all the pressures
Good.
And she did have the trach. And then she went to rehab for several months. You know, she is working full time.
Oh.
So, I mean,
it takes one person to step in there and say something.
Right,
and
exactly,
I mean, think of how many people have died because of this.
Well, and it's not just happening to my family.
Right, it's
and close
happening
friends.
all over.
You know, I can't believe that I'm just aware of it happening. So, yes, it's an intention, and I think it's misguided compassion. A lot of people think that, you know, this is the most compassionate way, just like that neurologist, this is the most compassionate way to treat a human being. Oh, it's much too difficult to go through, you know, therapy, but quite frankly, it's the most cost-effective to send them to hospital. I'm sorry, but to send them down that path, they don't have to pay for rehab. They don't have to pay for, you know, all the time that it takes. It is very cost-effective or costly to go through all that. Yes, but I think a human being deserves that.
Of course.
And I think that we have to look at each and every individual as they are made in the image and likeness of God.
Yes.
And I think people have forgotten that.
Oh,
like when
yes.
I'm working in the hospital and I have a patient, I'm praying at the time that I'm taking care of that patient, and I'm saying, Jesus, I do this for you. Even the simplest little things. I am doing this because I know that you are in that person. I am serving you.
Mary. Yes.
But we have lost that whole
Yes. It's all about
idea.
the quality of life.
Well, it is just a godless society, but if
Right.
you start seeing Christ in each person, that's going to change your attitude and the treatment that you want for that
that's
person.
right.
And
Very
so
important.
that's very basic. And then the other issue is there is a value to suffering, and that this you don't hear in any other faith. I don't believe. I'm not a sadomasochist. You know, and we're not trying to inflict suffering. No, we're talking about suffering that we cannot be alleviated. We can join that suffering and use it as a prayer, and it's a very powerful prayer. We can use it for our own redemption, or we can help others for their conversion or for whatever needs that they need for their healing in their lives. And that's the beautiful part of our faith as Catholics, is that there is that value to suffering. So therefore, if you eliminate a life, if you take a life prematurely, you may have in event taken a life so that they haven't reconciled with God, or they haven't had that opportunity to use that suffering for their own redemption or for somebody else's.
Right.
So it's very interesting. I mean, our faith is so rich as Catholics.
Mary, also is the point that if we take their life, they don't have the chance to repent.
They don't.
They don't have the chance for the last,
The last
anointing,
sacraments?
the last sacraments.
Absolutely.
That can bring them right to heaven, to the face of God.
Exactly.
And we're depriving them of that.
Exactly. And so all of that is so very important in that stage. And then we're not defining, you know, we are made in the image and likeness of God. We are defining people according to what they can do and what they can't do. Well, you know, and their value and their worth.
Right.
How dare us? You know, that is not our judgment.
Right.
And so, you know, I say, even the children in Guatemala that I see, there are a lot of cerebral palsy children that wouldn't survive on the streets at all. And I was talking to Mother Superior, the Franciscan order down there, and I was saying, you know, these are beautiful souls. These are all saints. But not only are they saints, they're doing some of the most important work. They are saint makers, which means because they are here, they are making us better people.
That's right.
We have to exercise patience. We have to exercise kindness, compassion, true compassion. Help them live to the utmost of their dignity as a human being, not killing them.
No.
You know, so they are doing very important work, and just their presence here on earth, they are helping us becoming better Christians, closer to God, because we are serving Christ in that individual. Like I said, each and every human being has Christ. And if you serve Christ in that person, that changes the whole perspective.
Mary, we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted you to talk on what we can do for ourselves and for our families.
Thank you. Yes, a lot of people think that they can sign a living will, and a lot of those living wills are very basic. I'd say exercise caution because it can be interpreted in many different ways. What you think is extraordinary may not be what the hospital or your care providers find as extraordinary. A lot of that terminology can be twisted and manipulated.
I thought you shouldn't even do the living will thing.
I don't have a living will. What I have is a power of attorney.
Yes, I do too.
And so what I advise people to do is have that discussion even with your family members. Don't assume that everybody thinks alike. I am power of attorney of several different people outside the family because unfortunately their children or loved ones are of different thinking and are estranged. And so they don't trust that in the end that their best interest will be kept in mind.
Right.
And so anyways, I advise people to go about getting a power of attorney, which is a special document, and then that document has to be given, it has to be notarized, a copy, and has to be given in the hands of the person. Because when you go to the hospital, they're going to say, well, where's your document?
Right.
You know, and a lot of times it's locked up, the original is locked up, because the person that had made that document, but you want a copy and a notarized copy of it so that when you are required to act as power of attorney, you have that.
So the power of aterney person has it. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Definitely. That is so important.
Right. And then that person would make the decisions, you know, in the event that you are not able to.
And then also to just stay with your loved ones, be sure you're there with them, don't leave their
questions.
sides.
Don't leave their sides, ask questions. I know sometimes medical people get a little upset with questions, but I always welcome it. I think, you know, thank God when I see a big family waiting and really wanting to know what's happening, and I get worried when I see a vulnerable person in a bed and nobody's around. You know, I get very concerned. So,
Well, Mary, we're going to provide some resources too for the viewers to go on and look at this more thoroughly. But we're out of time, so I'm sorry. But thank you again.
Well, thank you so much.
God bless you,
God bless
Mary.
you.
What a sick person needs, besides medical care, is love. The human and supernatural warmth of being surrounded by all those close to him or her. Parents and children, doctors and nurses. In the words of Blessed Mother Teresa of Calcutta, human dignity does not consist in being able to choose the time of one's death, but in being aware of the fact that one's basic right is the right of respect for life, of respect for human dignity. If you missed part of this program, you can find it on our website at catholicparents.org. Thanks for watching, and God bless you and yours.